Does the Treasury Department or the various components of the FMOC have the authority to bail out Bitcoin?
Could you please elaborate? What exactly does bail out Bitcoin
Okay,
mean,
could you
Congressman?
instruct the banks of this country to buy more Bitcoin or change banking regulations?
Again, that within the context of asset diversification within banks, they could hold many assets.
Senator Brad Sherman, the former chairman of California's Board of Equalization, the agency that once oversaw the largest state sales tax system in America, completely dismantles the administration's tariff narrative with a single devastating word: sophistry. While economists argue that a sudden 20% price increase is only a one-time adjustment rather than inflation, Sherman delivers a reality check that hits much harder. He points out that ordinary Americans don't care about economic jargon. When prices jump by 20%, families simply know one thing: they can no longer afford what they used to buy. He then exposes what he believes is the real purpose behind tariffs on everyday essentials like coffee and bananas, shifting the tax burden onto working Americans while helping finance tax breaks for the wealthiest. It's a sharp accusation that reframes the entire debate and raises serious questions about who truly benefits. Then the hearing takes an unexpected turn. Sherman pivots to a question that almost no one has been asking Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Does the U.S. government have the authority to bail out Bitcoin? The answer that follows is both surprising and revealing, exposing a side of government involvement in cryptocurrency that few people saw coming.
Ranking member of our Capital Markets Subcommittee, Mr. Sherman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to agree with the gentleman from Michigan that we need to impose those sanctions on the Myanmar regime and protect, of course, the Rohingya minority to the extent we can. FSOC has to define what is systemic. I, for one, think that we shouldn't be focusing on the assets, but rather the liabilities. We didn't have a problem in 2008 because the banks had too many assets. We had a problem because they had too many liabilities. So I don't see how most—
Congressman, that's incorrect. Ben Bernanke, then Fed chair, said, could you please tell me what these assets are?
I'm going to reclaim my time. Regardless of that, I'm going to ask you whether you— not going to ask you to agree with me. I'm going to ask you to agree with your predecessor, Secretary Mnuchin. During the first Trump administration, Secretary Mnuchin promulgated interpretive guidance that prioritized an activities-based approach to systemic risk regulation over an entity approach. Secretary Bessent, you have indicated that you want to kick off a review of FSOC's activities and processes. The FSOC Improvement Act, led by my colleague, Dr. Foster, which I've co-sponsored, as you know, would codify an activities-based approach to systemic risk regulation. Does the FSOC plan to revert to the 2019 guidance of the first Trump administration regarding a definition of a SIFI?
Yes, we prefer an activities-based approach rather than an institutional-based approach.
Thank you. I want to pick up on the ranking member's comments about whether tariffs cause inflation. You know, economists can say when the price of something goes up by 20%, that isn't inflation. It's a one-time price increase. But out in my district, when the price of something goes up by 20%, we call that unaffordability. And to say it's not inflation is a sophistry. I'll point out that every time Democrats had and regulations that increased a company's cost, people in this room said that's going to cause inflation. Well, tariffs clearly have to be paid by companies, and if environmental costs are passed through, you can be sure tariffs are passed through. The ranking member asked the question, why a tariff on coffee and bananas? I think the answer is obvious: to make our tax system more regressive, to pay for the big, bad, beautiful bills, cuts in taxes for billionaires, and to fund ICE. I used to head the largest sales tax agency in this country, and we knew the sales tax was regressive, but we knew it would be even more regressive if we imposed taxes, sales taxes on food. And that is what you do with a tariff on bananas and coffee. Mr. Secretary, we lived through the bailouts of 2008 when powerful men lose money. They now want a government bailout. Does the Treasury Department or the various components of the FMOC have the authority to bail out Bitcoin?
Could you please elaborate? What exactly does bail out Bitcoin
Okay,
mean,
could you
Congressman?
instruct the banks of this country to buy more Bitcoin, or change banking regulations so that they are encouraged to do so in terms of the reserves that they're otherwise required to have?
Again, that within the context of asset diversification within banks, they could hold many assets.
They can, and there are different, but do you have the authority to order banks to buy Bitcoin or to invest U.S. tax dollars in Bitcoin or Trump coin?
I am Secretary of the Treasury. I do not have the authority to do that, and as Chair of FSOC, I do not have that authority.
So we're not going to see our tax dollars invested in crypto assets?
Well, why would a private bank be your tax dollars, Congressman?
Excuse me, I'm now asking about the money of our taxpayers, which you manage as Secretary of the Treasury. Is it going to be deployed into crypto assets?
We are retaining seized Bitcoin.
That's not exactly taxpayer money. You collect a lot of taxes this month?
No, that is an asset of the U.S.
It's an asset of the
It
U.S.
is an asset of the U.S. government.
And are you going to invest
and,
any?
and I will point out,
Mr. Secretary, reclaiming my time, are you going to invest?
from California,
the asset
stop.
seizure, that $1 billion of Bitcoin was seized, $500 million was retained, and that $500 million has become over $15 billion.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, the ranking member of our Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Meeks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Bessent, if I'm not mistaken, you were working in the financial service industry during the late 1980s, correct?
I was.
Thank you. And well, I'm wondering, do you recall or you're knowledgeable of the Keating 5 scandal back then?
Yes, sir, and I will point out that I was.
I don't want to.
No. I will point out that
limited time. I have limited time.
I identified.
The gentleman is from the Secretary. Is the gentleman from New York's time?
Right. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows who doesn't know that the Keating 5 scandal involved 5 U.S. senators accused of pressuring the Federal Home Loan Bank Board to expedite and give more consideration to the case of Charles Keating, Jr., who ran the California-based Lincoln Savings and Loans. It led to a 14-month investigation unveiling how 5 U.S. senators and staff ended up with more than $1 million in contributions, 4 trips to the Bahamas, and all expenses paid stays at resort hotels. Following the scandal, the industry saw sweeping regulatory changes that was launched by then-President George H.W. Bush. Now, Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you can agree conflicts of interest and improper influence by U.S. elected officials over bank regulators weaken supervisory independence and ultimately impose massive losses on consumers and taxpayers. I think that we can all agree upon that. And as we know, the basic lessons from the post-Keating reforms still applies today when the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, the OCC, is deciding to get a bank charter. I think we can stimulate that. Now, Mr. Bessent, as our nation's treasurer, I'm sure you also know that a foreign-linked investment firm tied to the United Arab Emirates government quietly bought about half of the Trump family's crypto company, World Liberty Financial. And at the very same time, the President of the United States was dealing with that country on foreign policy. Now, Eric Trump, the president's son and co-founder of World Liberty Financial, said, and I quote, "I'm not going to get into who the investors are, but I've got some pretty meaningful investors," end of quote. Lack of transparency. And it didn't end there. When Trump fans brought the tokens, they thought they were getting the deal of a century. But what they didn't know was that only Trump and his sons had the sole power to decide who can sell the token and when. Today, the price of the token has fallen over 50%, and the Trump fans who bought the token are now begging to get out. Now, I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. You can see it for yourself on the World Liberty Financial Discussion Forum. Yeah, yourself, Mr. Secretary. So this is no longer just about a shady crypto deal or a possible gift when a foreign-linked investor is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a company controlled by the president's family, and at the same time, this president is conducting foreign policy with that country. You know what that creates? It creates a national security concern. So, I'm not going to ask much of you, Mr. Secretary. I just want to know whether you will commit today to pause and heighten the scrutiny of any bank charter or licensing application at the OCC connected to the World Liberty Financial until all of these conflicts of interest and foreign influence reviews are completed and shared with the United States Congress. All I need to know is, will you halt it and do a complete investigation and scrutiny of this licensing application? All you have to ask is yes or no.
No, Congressman.
All you have to ask is yes or no.
OCC is an independent entity, and I would know, Congressman,
I take that as a no.
You traveled to Venezuela to lobby
I take that as a no.
Chavez on behalf of
I take that as a no.
On behalf of your
You
donor.
do not want to answer that question. I take that as a no.
For a $7 billion contract.
I'm asking you to do your responsibility as Secretary of the Treasury.
Into a Venezuelan.
You do not.
Mr. Meeks,
Will you?
time has expired.
You cannot erase what you did in 2006.
He's the one that went past your time, Mr. Chairman.
No,
he did not answer my question, and he wouldn't pass the time.
He had 6 seconds left to try to answer your question, and the
it was a yes or no. It was a yes or no answer. I asked him, will he? No, it was yes or no.
Recognizes
the OCC is
the gentleman.
Stop covering for the president. Stop being his flunky.
Gentlemen.
He's talking to me. I'm responding back to him.
2006 trip to Venezuela.
Stop covering for the president. Don't be a flunky. Work for the American people.
Mr. Meeks,
trip to Venezuela.
Work for the American people. Don't be a cover-up for a mob.
Maybe you're going to
as
see
long
your
as
friend
he talks,
Nicholas
you talk.
Maduro
Gentleman
in Brooklyn
is not
prison.
recognized. Mr. Bessent, please.
Let's take a closer look at what Senator Brad Sherman just uncovered during his exchange with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Because this wasn't just another political debate. Sherman dismantled 2 of the administration's biggest talking points with relentless precision. His first argument was simple but powerful. Calling tariff-driven price increases anything other than inflation is nothing more than clever wordplay designed to hide a tax burden on working Americans. His second argument was even more surprising. While the Treasury Secretary insisted he has no authority to invest taxpayer money in cryptocurrency, Sherman revealed that the U.S. government is already sitting on a massive Bitcoin position worth billions of dollars. That's where his decades of tax expertise became impossible to ignore. For months, the administration and its allies have argued that tariffs don't technically cause inflation. According to their explanation, if a tariff raises the price of a product by 20%, that's merely a one-time price adjustment, not the broad, sustained inflation economists traditionally describe. Sherman doesn't waste time arguing over textbook definitions. Instead, he shifts the conversation to what ordinary Americans actually experience. In his district, when groceries, household goods, or everyday necessities suddenly cost 20% more, families don't stop to debate economic terminology. They simply know they can no longer afford the same things they bought before. To those families, the label doesn't matter. The pain does. That's why Sherman calls the administration's argument exactly what he believes it is: sophistry. In other words, using technical language to distract from a very real financial burden that millions of Americans are already feeling. Then he exposes what he sees as a major contradiction. For years, many of the same politicians defending tariffs argued that environmental regulations would raise business costs and fuel inflation, because companies would pass those expenses on to consumers. Sherman's question is straightforward. If businesses pass environmental compliance costs on to customers, why wouldn't they also pass tariff costs on to customers? The logic can't work one way for regulations and another for tariffs. Either businesses absorb every added expense, which history suggests they rarely do, or consumers end up paying the bill. Then Sherman reveals what he believes is the real purpose behind these tariffs. Why place tariffs on products like coffee and bananas, items the United States produces very little of and industries that aren't being protected? His answer is blunt. Because tariffs on everyday necessities function like a consumption tax, and consumption taxes hit lower-income families the hardest. Drawing from his years leading one of America's largest sales tax agencies, Sherman explains that food has traditionally been exempt from many sales taxes for one reason: taxing basic necessities is one of the most regressive forms of taxation imaginable. Tariffs on coffee and bananas reverse that principle. According to Sherman, the result is simple. Working families pay more for essentials, while the revenue helps fund tax cuts for the wealthiest and supports expanded government spending elsewhere. But then the hearing takes an unexpected turn. Sherman shifts from tariffs to cryptocurrency and asks a question almost no one else has raised. After witnessing the financial bailouts during the 2008 crisis, he asks Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent directly, "Does the Treasury Department have the authority to bail out Bitcoin?" He pushes even further. Could the Treasury order banks to buy Bitcoin? Could it change banking rules to encourage larger Bitcoin holdings? Could taxpayer money ever be used to purchase Bitcoin, or even assets tied to political cryptocurrencies? Bessent's answer is clear: no. As Treasury Secretary, he says he does not have the authority to direct taxpayer funds into cryptocurrency investments. But Sherman isn't finished. He spots something that doesn't quite add up. When asked whether taxpayer money would ever be exposed to crypto, Bessent explains that the federal government has retained a significant amount of seized Bitcoin instead of selling it. Then come the numbers. Roughly $1 billion worth of Bitcoin was originally seized. About $500 million was retained instead of liquidated. Since then, that holding has grown to more than $15 billion in value. Bessent argues that this isn't an investment. It's simply the government holding confiscated assets. But Sherman challenges that distinction. Whether the Bitcoin was purchased or seized, the federal government now holds an enormous position in one of the world's most volatile assets. If its value continues to rise, the government benefits. If it crashes, the public ultimately bears the financial consequences, and that's the central theme running through Sherman's entire line of questioning. Strip away the political language, strip away the technical definitions, and focus on what is actually happening. A tariff on food still acts like a regressive tax. A 20% jump in prices still makes life less affordable, and a multi-billion-dollar government Bitcoin holding still represents public exposure to a highly volatile asset. Throughout the hearing, Sherman repeatedly cuts through complicated economic language and forces the conversation back to one simple question: who pays the price and who benefits? By the end of the exchange, he leaves viewers with the impression that the answer points in the same direction every single time.